That morning in Milwaukee felt colder than usual, even though the sun was just rising. I stepped out onto the porch with a cup of coffee in hand and froze when I saw a taxi pull up to the curb. Out stepped Jenna, my wife, but she didn't look like someone returning from a harmless night with a friend. She wore a man's blazer, draped carelessly over her shoulders, as if it had been offered in int asterisk Macy rather than courtesy. In her hand was a sleek, expensive glasses case I had never seen before, and on the side of her neck, faint but undeniable, was a fresh mark of lipstick that didn't match her own shade. Her dress, once elegant, looked crumpled and stretched, like it had survived a long night rather than a quick dinner. I glanced at our driveway and saw her car still parked there, untouched. A small suitcase leaned against the steps of our porch, already packed, as if her return had been rehearsed. When she noticed me, she didn't panic. Instead, she forced a smile and launched into a story about staying over with a friend who had been going through a hard time. She made it sound like she was the caring wife, the loyal friend, the person who would never betray. But the details didn't add up. Her friend lived across town, nowhere near where a taxi would be dropping her off at dawn. Her voice carried too much confidence, as though the explanation had been prepared in advance. I didn't argue. I only watched her carry the suitcase inside, pretending not to notice the blazer, the lipstick, or the unease that settled in my chest. But deep down, I knew. I had just seen the first undeniable crack in our marriage. The air carried the damp chill of early autumn, the kind that seeps through clothing and lingers in bones. The neighborhood was quiet, save for the fading hum of the taxi's engine as it disappeared down the street. Even the birds seemed hesitant to start their morning calls. Everything felt suspended, unnatural, as if the world itself held its breath at the sight I had just witnessed. I kept replaying the image in my head. The misplaced blazer, the wrong lipstick, the foreign glasses case. Each detail clung to me like a burr, small but impossible to shake off. I thought about the way she stepped out of that car. Not hurried, not apologetic, but calculated, as though she knew exactly how she wanted me to see her. A woman returning from sacrifice, from helping a friend in distress. It was too clean, too rehearsed. The suitcase was the final insult. That detail could not be explained away so easily. Who packs a bag to console a grieving friend overnight? Who has the foresight to fold clothes neatly and zip a suitcase shut before rushing to someone's aid? No, that was a plan. That was intent. Inside, I heard the rustle of fabric and the clink of hangers as she hung up the blazer, as if by claiming it into our closet it could suddenly become ours, part of her wardrobe. But I knew better. It was cut too broad in the shoulders, the sleeves too long, the scent unmistakably cologne. A man's scent, one I had never worn. I lingered on the porch longer than I should have, staring at the damp wood beneath my feet, trying to gather my thoughts. Part of me wanted to storm inside, demand answers, tear through that suitcase and expose what lay within. Another part of me, the quieter, more rational side, urged patience. If I rushed now, I would only be handed another story, another carefully crafted lie to join the one she had just told. And if I accepted it, I would only be helping her bury the truth deeper. So I stood there, drinking coffee that had long since turned cold, and made a silent promise to myself. I would not confront her with suspicion. I would confront her with proof. This morning, this vision burned into my mind, was only the first step. She came to the doorway a few minutes later, her hair hastily brushed, lips repainted to hide the earlier smear. She looked at me the way one looks at an obstacle in the hallway. Something to be stepped around, not confronted. Her eyes lingered on my coffee mug, then darted to the street, then back to me, avoiding the weight of my gaze. She repeated the story again, softer this time, as though the gentleness of her tone could smooth over the absurdity of her excuse. I nodded, offered a smile that felt more like a grimace, and let her pass. The rest of that morning played out in uneasy quiet. She showered longer than usual, humming faintly through the door. I sat at the kitchen table, the coffee pot empty, staring at the grain of the wood. Every sound in the house felt magnified. The creak of the pipes, the click of her heels across the floor, the distant buzz of her phone vibrating on the counter. Each sound was a reminder that something fundamental had shifted. The foundation of trust had cracked, and no story could plaster it back together. By the time she left for work, dressed sharply and carrying the suitcase back out to her car, I had already begged asterisk and cataloging the inconsistencies in my head. The timeline didn't match, the objects didn't belong, the explanation didn't hold. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was evidence. And evidence once seen cannot be unseen. When the door shut behind her and the car engine faded into the distance, the silence of the house wrapped around me. It was a silence I once cherished, a pause between the beats of a busy life. Now it felt oppressive, a void filled with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. But one thing was clear. The morning on that porch had marked the beginning of a new chapter, one I hadn't chosen but one I could no longer avoid. The rest of that day unraveled slowly, like a thread pulled loose from a tightly woven fabric. I went through the motions, washing the mug, rinsing the sink, tidying the living room. But each action felt mechanical, hollow, as if I were watching myself from the outside. My mind was elsewhere, caught in the loop of her arrival, the small betrayals etched into her appearance. Even the familiar spaces of our home seemed altered. The photos on the wall, our wedding portrait, the trip to Denver, the summer barbecue with friends, looked staged now, like props in a play whose storyline had shifted when I wasn't paying attention. The sofa where we once curled up to watch movies seemed foreign, too neatly arranged, as though waiting for an audience instead of two people living a life. The hours stretched, heavy with silence. I found myself opening drawers without reason, checking for something out of place, some overlooked clue. It wasn't mistrust alone that drove me. It was survival. To pretend nothing had changed would be to let her rewrite reality, and I wasn't willing to surrender truth so easily. Every sound outside, a car door slamming, a dog barking, the mail truck pulling away, felt amplified, as though the world itself leaned in, waiting to see if I would act. When evening came, the sun cast long shadows through the blinds, stripes of gold and gray across the floor. I sat in that fading light and realized that the day had been consumed entirely by one moment. Her stepping out of that taxi. It was no longer just an image. It was a fracture line, spreading through everything I thought I knew about my marriage. A warning carved into the ordinary, impossible to sand away. The drive back from that first morning stayed with me, but what weighed heavier was how every memory of the past months began to shift shape in my mind. The moment I saw Jenna step out of that taxi, details I had brushed off as trivial returned like shards of glass catching light. One by one, they arranged themselves into a mosaic I could no longer ignore. It wasn't a single accident or coincidence. It was a pattern, a rhythm too precise to be anything but deliberate. Started with her phone. For years we had shared everything without hesitation. Netflix passwords, spare keys, even each other's devices when one of us misplaced our own. But a few months ago, her phone became untouchable. A new password appeared without explanation, and the screen was always face down on the table, as though the glow of a notification might burn through the wood itself. At first I told myself it was work confidentiality. She was taking on more projects, maybe protecting sensitive information. But the secrecy clung to her like a shadow, and shadows always hide something. Then there were the nights she stayed late. Meetings, she said. Corporate dinners, she explained. But the calendar on our shared fridge never reflected them, and the timing was too irregular to be real scheduling. Sometimes it was a Monday, other times a Thursday, often stretching past midnight. The excuse was always airtight, but the rhythm was wrong, and I could feel it. Checks and receipts began to surface in unexpected places. Her jacket pockets, her car's console, even once tucked into a novel on her nightstand. They told a quiet story of dinners for two glasses of wine, 2 entrees, 2 desserts. Places we had never visited together, bars we had never once set foot inside. Always 2, never 1. I remember running my thumb along the crumpled edge of a receipt and feeling as though the paper itself carried the weight of betrayal. Her scent, too, began to betray her. Perfume was nothing new. She had always liked to experiment with fragrances, but these were not perfumes. They were undertones of something else, a trace of musk that didn't belong to her. Not mine either. At times it clung faintly to her hair, other times it lingered on her scarf when she dropped it over a chair. Subtle but undeniable. There were nights when she returned home with jewelry I had never seen before. A bracelet thin as a whisper, a pair of earrings that sparkled under the dim kitchen light. When I asked casually where they came from, she said coworkers gifted them, or that they were promotional samples from a client. Her voice had the smoothness of habit, a rehearsed rhythm designed to pacify. I swallowed the explanations, but my mind stored the contradictions. One evening, while mowing the lawn, a neighbor leaned on the fence and mentioned casually that he had seen a man at our doorstep around midnight the week before. Tall guy, dark jacket, looked confused when I waved. He said with a laugh, as though it were nothing. I laughed back, pretending not to care. But deep down, something cracked. At the time, I brushed it off as mistaken identity, maybe someone lost, maybe an Uber driver at the wrong address. But now, replaying the neighbor's tone, the ease with which he described it, I understood he hadn't been mistaken at all. Patterns emerged when I wasn't even searching. Business trips scheduled last minute, gym sessions that stretched into late evenings, lunches that became dinners without warning. Every time, the explanation was airtight, the delivery smooth. I wanted to believe her, but each story came wrapped in the same scent of performance. My memory shifted further back, to subtle shifts I had ignored. Her laughter, once shared easily at our kitchen table, had grown selective, reserved for texts arriving at odd hours. Her gaze, once steady and warm, often drifted into distance when we sat together, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve or tapping her phone face down. I saw it then for what it was, not distraction but division. She was splitting her life between two worlds, and I was expected to accept the fragments she offered. The small lies began to form a skeleton, and the flesh of memory wrapped around it until the figure stood complete. Every time she walked in late, every strange receipt, every new trinket, every locked screen, they no longer lived in isolation. They belonged together, forming a truth I could no longer dismiss. And once the pieces aligned, I realized that trust wasn't eroding slowly. It had already collapsed. What remained was debris, sharp enough to wound every time I stumbled across it. I remember one Saturday morning when she claimed she had a work seminar downtown. She left in a rush, barely touching the breakfast I had made, and didn't return until well past dusk. I noticed her heels were scuffed differently than when she left, and there was a faint line across her wrist where a watch had rested, yet she had left the house wearing none. That night, as she slept soundly beside me, I stared at the ceiling and counted every irregularity, each one its own whisper of truth she refused to say out loud. There were also digital ghosts. Once, while syncing our shared calendar, I saw an event marked only with the initials T.M. scheduled at a hotel near the airport. When I asked, she brushed it off as a placeholder for a client dinner. She even deleted the event while I watched, pretending it had been an error. But mistakes don't wear cologne, don't leave lipstick stains, don't drop receipts for wine meant for two. Even her laughter betrayed her. She used to laugh in unison with me, sharing the rhythm of jokes, our humor woven tightly together. Now her laughter came from behind a door, muffled during long phone calls, different in tone, lighter, more electric, like the spark of a woman discovering someone new. And when she emerged, her eyes shone not with joy shared, but with secrets guarded. I caught myself studying her as though she were a stranger. The way she tilted her head when she texted, the softness of her smile when she thought no one was watching, the urgency in her stride when she left the room at the sound of a message. It was like watching an actress rehearse a role, only the performance was no longer for me. By the time autumn deepened and the leaves fell across our yard in a crimson blanket, the doubts had hardened into certainty. I had enough fragments to know the story, but not enough to confront her without being crushed under the weight of denial. So I waited. I stored every memory like a puzzle piece, each sharper than the last. The mosaic was finished in my mind, but I knew that soon I would need proof. not just suspicion. Proof that would silence every excuse and leave no room for lies. The weeks of suspicion had built up like storm clouds, and I knew sooner or later lightning would strike. I could not live forever in the half-light of maybes. I needed clarity, no matter how much it burned. So when Jenna announced she would be away for a women's retreat up north, something in me snapped into motion. Her suitcase was smaller than usual, the type for a weekend, and her tone carried the same smooth performance I had grown used to. But I had already decided I would no longer be an audience to her play. I had installed a tracker in her car weeks before, after too many nights left staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of her excuses. That morning, when she pulled out of the driveway, I opened the app. The little dot did not move north toward the retreat cabins she described. Instead, it cut south, then west, winding away from the city into stretches of highway that led nowhere near her story. My chest tightened, each mile further proof. I followed at a distance, careful not to appear in her mirrors. The road narrowed, bending through stands of bare trees. The sun slipped behind a bank of clouds, and the light turned gray, as though even the sky wanted to veil what was coming. Finally, the dot stopped near a cluster of lakeside cottages. I parked down the road and walked the last stretch on foot, gravel crunching softly beneath my shoes. Each step carried dread and inevitability, as if I were walking not to a house but to a verdict. The cottage stood 2 stories high, glass-fronted, with wide panoramic windows facing the water. Curtains were drawn open as though the place wanted to display what it held. Through the glass I saw her, Jenna, in a dark green dress I had never seen before, hair loose around her shoulders, face lit by candlelight. Across from her sat Tyler, a colleague whose name I had heard too many times in casual mentions. His hand rested near hers on the table, their movements leaning into one another like magnets. A bottle of wine glowed ruby in the light, 2 glasses already half empty. I froze, my body refusing to move though my heart pounded as if it wanted to escape my chest. I watched her laugh, tilt her head, brush her fingers across his sleeve with a tenderness I hadn't felt in months. And then it happened. She leaned forward, he met her halfway, and their lips touched. Not a brief, clumsy kiss, but one carried with familiarity, with comfort, with passion rehearsed through stolen hours. My throat went dry. The mosaic I had been building was no longer fragments. It was complete. I wanted to rush inside, to tear the door open and shatter the scene, but something stronger held me back. If I did, she would twist it, deny it, rebuild another lie to stand between me and the truth. No, this moment had to burn into my memory untouched, unchallenged. I stayed in the shadows, watching as they rose from the table, his hand sliding around her waist. They disappeared into the bedroom beyond, and the closing door felt like a final gavel. Sentence passed. Proof delivered. I stumbled back toward my car, each step heavy as lead. My legs felt foreign, my breath jagged, my eyes burning though no tears fell. The world around me blurred, the rustling reeds by the lake, the whistle of wind through branches, the distant call of a bird. All of it was muted beneath the roar of confirmation. It was over. Not just suspicion, not just theory. Over. The life I had believed in had collapsed in one kiss and one door shutting behind them. On the drive home, the road stretched endless, headlights carving tunnels through the dusk. I gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. Memories flooded me unbidden. The day we first moved into our house, her laughter echoing in the empty rooms. The vacations planned on napkins in diners. The promises spoken under wedding lights. Each memory turned brittle, hollow, as though touched by frost. I realized I was mourning something still alive but already gone. When I pulled into our driveway hours later, the house looked the same, its windows glowing softly, porch light steady. But it was no longer home. It was a stage where betrayal had been rehearsed until flawless. I sat in the car long after the engine died, staring at the door, knowing that whatever happened next, I could never unsee the truth revealed through those glass windows by the lake. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark of the living room, the glow of the street lamp falling in thin stripes across the floor. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the cottage again. The glint of wine in their glasses, the angle of her shoulders leaning toward him, the way his hand hovered as though claiming what I thought was mine. Sleep would not come, not with those images alive behind my eyelids. I paced instead, back and forth, the boards creaking beneath me like a metronome counting down the end of something sacred. At times, anger surged, hot and choking, demanding release. I imagined walking back to that cottage, dragging her out into the cold night, forcing her to look at me and explain. Other times, the anger drained, leaving only exhaustion, a hollow ache that spread through my bones. My body trembled with adrenaline long after there was nothing left to fight. I thought about all the signs I had excused. The perfume, the jewelry, the laughter behind closed doors. Each one had been a warning, a signal flare, and I had dimmed them with hope. Sitting there, I felt foolish, as though I had been complicit in my own undoing by refusing to accept the truth sooner. Betrayal is never only about the act. It is about the erosion of dignity, the slow suffocation of trust. She hadn't just broken vows. She had reshaped the story of our life without asking if I wanted a new chapter. Toward dawn, exhaustion finally pushed me into a restless half-sleep on the couch. In my dreams, the lake stretched endlessly, the cottage glowing like a lantern, and Jenna's silhouette stood in the window beside a man who was not me. I reached out, but my hand touched only cold glass. When I woke, my chest was tight, my throat raw, as if I had been calling out in my sleep. Morning light revealed nothing had changed. The pictures still hung on the walls, her shoes still lined the hallway, her perfume still lingered faintly in the bedroom. Yet everything had shifted. The house had become evidence, each object tinged with suspicion. The scarf on the chair was not just cloth. It was a trace of someone else's cologne. The suitcase in the closet was not just luggage. It was a vessel waiting for another lie. I moved through the rooms like a stranger cataloging a crime scene, my own life reduced to exhibits. Later that day, she returned, face calm, eyes bright, carrying her empty suitcase as though she had been gone only for a harmless weekend. She kissed my cheek with practiced ease, placed her bag by the stairs, and began talking about traffic on the highway. I nodded, silent, while the image of her in that green dress with Tyler played behind my eyes. Every word she spoke now sounded like theater, every gesture rehearsed. I realized then that I could never again hear her voice without listening for the lie hidden beneath it. I didn't confront her right away. The impulse burned in me like a fever, but instinct told me that if I rushed, she would only deny, twist, and bury the truth beneath layers of lies. Rage would give her cover. Patience would strip it away. So I waited, and while I waited, I began to collect. What I was building was not only a defense of my sanity but a record no one could dispute. Evidence was colder than words, harder than excuses, and it would stand when emotions faltered. The first step was her phone. I could never unlock it, but I could watch. I noticed patterns in the times she silenced it, the moments when she turned its screen down with deliberate care. I saw how her thumb hovered over certain notifications, how her eyes lit up at messages before dimming when she caught me watching. I began photographing the moments discreetly, screen glowing, her face reflecting in it, her hand frozen mid-gesture. It wasn't proof of content, but it was proof of secrecy, and secrecy is its own kind of evidence. I turned next to the tracker, my quiet ally. Each journey she made left behind a trail of coordinates and timestamps. I exported them, line by line, into spreadsheets that mapped her movements. There were patterns, clusters around restaurants near the river, weekend stops at the same hotel, late-night detours to streets she had no reason to visit. I saved them all, highlighted them, printed maps and pinned them to a corkboard in the basement. The routes looked like arteries, pumping life into a secret I had only N to grasp. Receipts became my next collection. I searched her purse when she left it unattended, checked the glove compartment of her car, and once, while she showered, scanned the pockets of her coat. Restaurants for two, charges at wine bars, jewelry stores. I pressed them flat, slid them into plastic sleeves, and labeled them with dates. Soon I had a binder thick with slips of paper that spoke louder than any confession could. Each page carried its own whisper. You are not her only world. In her office I found traces too. During a weekend when she claimed to be on call, I drove to her workplace and sat in the parking lot. Through the window I saw her desk, and on it lay conference notes. Later, when she wasn't looking, I copied some pages into my phone. Scrawled beside bullet points about quarterly earnings were little doodles. Initials circled, hearts drawn faintly near one name in particular. Tyler. Not work shorthand, not professional shorthand, something else entirely. Emails were harder, but chance favored me. Once, when she asked me to print a document from her laptop, she forgot to log out. For a fleeting moment, her inbox lay open before me. Most messages were mundane, but tucked between them were ones sent late at night, written with a warmth absent from our home. They weren't explicit, but they dripped with subtext. Jokes about secret getaways, compliments on outfits I had never seen her wear for me, mentions of moments that clearly excluded me. I ***ed them all, heart hammering as I hit save. I found records of bookings too. One evening while she bathed, her tablet buzzed on the nightstand. Curiosity drew me in, and there it was. Reservations at cottages, hotels, conference centers. Always under her name, sometimes under both hers and his initials. I sent them to myself before carefully placing the device back. Later, in the basement, I printed confirmation emails and slid them into the binder alongside the receipts. The binder grew heavier, and with each new page I felt my anger sharpen into something cold. My house turned into an archive. The basement became a vault where reality was preserved. On one side stood the corkboard with maps and pins, the lines of her lies charted like battle plans. On the workbench lay the binder, swelling with evidence, its pages smelling faintly of ink and paper but carrying the weight of betrayal. I labeled boxes with dates, filled them with envelopes of photos and receipts, and stacked them neatly. It was no longer just my home. It was a crime scene I had cataloged in order to survive inside it. I felt myself changing as I worked. Emotion began to drain, replaced by method. Where once I shook with rage, now I steadied with cold purpose. Each new discovery didn't break me. It hardened me. If betrayal was fire, then evidence was ice, and ice was what I needed to survive. I stopped asking why and started asking how many. I stopped yearning for her explanations and began hunting for her patterns. She had made her choice. I was making mine. What struck me most was the repetition. None of this was spontaneous. It wasn't one mistake, one lapse. The trails showed frequency, habit, ritual. The texts hinted at familiarity, not novelty. The receipts spanned months, not days. It wasn't an accident of passion. It was a second life, layered carefully over the one we shared. And as I pieced it together, I felt less like a husband uncovering betrayal and more like a detective closing in on a suspect who believed she was untouchable. Nights blurred into one another as I worked in secret. When she fell asleep upstairs, I descended to the basement with a notebook and a lamp, cataloging every item like an archivist preserving history. I even recorded the sounds of our home, her whispered calls in the hallway, the sudden hush when I entered a room, the way her footsteps quickened when she retreated to answer a message. These fragments became part of the record. I wasn't simply gathering objects. I was documenting atmosphere, tone, silences. Betrayal leaves echoes, and I was capturing them all. Sometimes I caught my reflection in the basement window and hardly recognized myself. I looked less like a betrayed husband and more like a man conducting surveillance. And in a way I was. My own life had become a case file, and my wife was both the subject and the suspect. Yet the strange part was how calm it made me. Each piece of evidence I added to the binder dulled the sting of uncertainty. Doubt had teeth, but proof had order. With order, I could breathe. The house around me grew quieter. We spoke less, moved like tenants who shared space but not int asterisk Macy. She believed the silence was compliance, that my passivity meant blindness. In reality, silence was my shield. She walked through our days rehearsing her lies, while I sat with my growing archive, rehearsing the moment when the curtain would finally fall. And though pain simmered under the surface, discipline held me steady. I would not rush. I would wait until there was nothing she could deny. By then, the house no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like evidence storage, and I its keeper, waiting for the trial that would inevitably come. The night of the dinner in Chicago arrived like a final act already written, the curtain ready to rise. I had prepared for it with the same cold precision I had brought to every step of my investigation. The binder sat in my briefcase, neatly organized, its pages heavy with the weight of months of deceit. I wasn't attending as a husband anymore. I was attending as a witness, prepared to submit my evidence in the court of reality. The setting was a private dining room in a high-rise overlooking the river. The skyline shimmered through tall windows, and the hum of conversation filled the air. Colleagues, clients, and partners gathered around polished tables, glasses catching the glow of chandeliers. It should have been a night of celebration. Contracts signed, relationships strengthened. Instead, it was a stage I had chosen for the truth. Jenna entered in a crimson dress, her confidence radiant. Her smile sharpened into the kind of charm she wielded so easily. She greeted executives, laughed at their jokes, placed her hand lightly on an arm here, a shoulder there. Watching her, one could almost forget the shadows she left behind. Almost. But I had lived in those shadows, and I had brought them into the light. The hours leading up to that dinner had been filled with silence. I had checked the binder one final time in my hotel room, flipping through each page as if rehearsing lines for a performance. The receipts crackled faintly, the photos stared back with their mute certainty, the maps drew their silent lines. I knew them all by heart, but I studied them again, reminding myself that this wasn't just anger fueling me. It was truth, and truth had to be delivered without hesitation. When I arrived at the venue, the air carried the expensive fragrance of polished wood and aged wine. Waiters glided through the room in dark uniforms, carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres that disappeared as quickly as they appeared. The murmur of conversation rolled like a tide, punctuated by bursts of laughter that felt rehearsed, the language of networking. I slipped into my seat, nodding politely to those around me, but my mind was elsewhere, rehearsing the strike I was about to deliver. Jenna was in her element, the center of every orbit. She leaned toward clients, laughter spilling like champagne, her gestures elegant, her words carefully chosen. It was a performance she had mastered, the same performance she had carried into our marriage. I realized then how many times I had seen that exact smile, how often it had masked distance rather than closeness. Watching her weave through the room was like watching an actress recite lines she had spoken 100 times. I waited. I let her bask in the glow of her admirers, let the rhythm of the evening settle. The dishes arrived, salmon glazed in citrus, lamb seared and tender, vegetables arranged like artwork. The wine poured freely, glasses raised in toast after toast. And through it all, I remained quiet, a shadow at the edge of her spotlight, holding the storm at bay until the moment would matter most. The dinner began with speeches, executives praising growth and partnerships. Jenna leaned forward, eager to attach herself to their words, her laughter blending easily into the chorus. Then, with the room's attention fixed, she made her misstep. She spoke of me, her husband, casually, dismissively, calling my work a small-time project. Laughter followed, polite but sharp. My chest tightened, but I did not flinch. I had been waiting for that moment. I rose slowly, the scrape of my chair loud in the sudden hush. All eyes turned toward me, some expectant, others puzzled. I placed my briefcase on the table, opened it with calm deliberation, and withdrew the binder. Its weight landed with a dull thud, a sound more final than any spoken word. I opened to the first page, photographs of receipts, maps, messages, laid bare under the glow of the chandelier. I spoke little. Words were unnecessary. I turned page after page, sliding the binder toward her, letting the evidence speak. The air grew heavy. Chairs shifted. Forks stilled. Her hand froze on her glass, color draining from her face. She tried to laugh, to wave it off as misunderstanding, but the documents piled too high, too detailed, too undeniable. Gasps rippled through the room as I flipped page after page. Photographs of her car parked outside hotels, receipts signed in her name, screensh asterisk TS of reservations. A map with pins tracing the routes of her lies. Some guests shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting anywhere but at her. Others leaned forward, drawn morbidly to the unfolding collapse. Jenna's hands trembled slightly, though she fought to keep them still on the tablecloth. Then I did the only thing left. I slipped off my wedding ring, its metal cold against my fingers, and set it on the binder in front of her. The sound of it striking paper echoed through the silence. Gasps filled the room. Some looked at me with pity, others at her with thinly veiled judgment. The silence pressed harder than any accusation could. Her expression shifted in waves. Shock, anger, desperation. She tried to laugh, but the sound caught in her throat. She looked at colleagues, seeking rescue, but found only downcast eyes. No one offered her an excuse. No one extended a hand. She was alone, and for the first time in years, stripped of her practiced mask. I gathered my briefcase, left the binder where it lay, and walked out. The sound of whispers rose behind me, the shock rippling across the room like a wave breaking against stone. I did not look back. The marriage had ended not in private, not in secrecy, but in the full light of witnesses who would never forget the sight. That was the justice I had chosen. Not rage, but revelation. While sorting accounts during the separation, I found a dusty box in the basement. Letters, cards, notes written in hands not mine. The timelines stretched years, predating Tyler. It hit me then. Her betrayals weren't accidents but patterns, woven into her life long before I noticed. Every business trip, every late meeting, now gleamed in hindsight as cover. The evidence binder was heavy, but this box carried the heaviest truth. After the divorce, I cleared the house of her clothes, perfumes, pictures. I placed the binder on the attic shelf, scrawled "Truth" across it, and shut the door. For the first time, silence felt pure. Not suspicious, not oppressive, but freeing. No footsteps sneaking past midnight, no staged smiles. Just quiet air and space to breathe. She had destroyed our past, but I had survived it. In the wreckage, I found something stronger than her lies. My own freedom.